"You're not setting foot on my plane. Not today, and not ever." Those exact words would become a costly lesson, and the very last thing Captain Douglas Mercer would ever bark in his career. Sneering across the mahogany-paneled galley, he hurled pure contempt at a composed black family taking their seats on the $73 million private jet. Mercer spewed his arrogance, absolutely certain that no one was recording him. But karma is undefeated, and he was dead wrong. Little did this pilot know, the family he had just humiliated weren't some imposters trying to catch a free ride. They were the undercover bosses, the actual owners of the entire airline, and they had just bought out the company. Exactly 11 days ago. The Rocky Mountain air that Tuesday morning tasted like pine and altitude, thin and cool at 6,000 feet. The Pinnacle FBO terminal on the west side of Denver International was the kind of facility where the floors were polished to a mirror shine, and the staff called you by your first name before you'd even introduced yourself. 3 sovereign air jets gleamed on the private ramp under a sky the color of hammered copper. The largest of them, tail number N884SR, was a Challenger 850 configured for 12 passengers, bird's-eye walnut paneling, Italian cream leather, a bed in the aft suite, and twin Rolls-Royce turbofan engines that could push the aircraft coast to coast without a fuel stop. Captain Douglas Mercer had been sitting in the left seat of that aircraft for the better part of 4 years. He was 53 years old, with the permanently squared jaw of a man who'd spent decades believing his rank was the most interesting thing about him. 19 years in commercial aviation had left him with a deep, institutional sense of grievance. He felt the airlines had never appreciated him, had passed him over for chief pilot roles twice, had forced him to fly routes he found beneath his ability. Private aviation had felt like a correction, a restoration. Here, on his aircraft, his authority was absolute and unchallengeable. He wore his 4 gold stripes like a crown. In the galley behind the cockpit, Mara Hollins was arranging a tray of chilled Pellegrino and fresh orchid with the careful attention of someone who had learned very early in life that precision kept you employed. She was 28, efficient, professionally warm, in the practiced way of people who have mastered the art of being invisible while being present. She had flown with Mercer for 14 months. She knew exactly what his silences meant. Manifest updated. Captain, her voice carried over the low whine of the auxiliary power unit. Party of 4 under the Langford Group. Wheels up at 9:45. Destination Teterboro. Mercer didn't look up from his avionics display. The Langford Group. That's the investment holding company out of Houston, right? Yes, sir. The booking came through our broker, Skyline Executive. 4 passengers. He tapped the glass screen. Make sure the Johnny Walker Blue is accessible. People like that want to see a full bar before they're even buckled in. Mara said nothing. She turned back to her prep. She noted that he'd said people like that, and she filed the observation the way she filed everything. Quietly, without comment, in a mental drawer she rarely opened. At 9:19, a black Cadillac Escalade with Texas plates rolled through the security gate and crossed the ramp toward the aircraft. Mercer leaned forward in his seat to look through the cockpit window. He had built a mental image of the Langford Group. Older, silver-haired, the kind of men who wore their wealth like a second suit. Big handshakes. Louder than necessary, he had flown that profile 100 times. The Escalade door opened. Marcus Langford stepped out first. He was 46, 6'2", built like someone who had played college basketball and never stopped. He wore dark gray chinos, a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a pair of plain leather loafers with no socks. Nothing about him announced money. He paused on the tarmac and tilted his face toward the sun for a half-second, the way a man does when he's been inside too long and finally has a moment to breathe. Behind him came his wife, Celeste, lean, natural hair pinned at the neck, a butter-yellow blouse, reading glasses tucked on top of her head. She had a soft leather portfolio under one arm, and the composed, slightly amused expression of a woman who expected the world to surprise her and usually wasn't. Then their daughter Simone, 22, wearing a University of Colorado sweatshirt and carrying a camera bag, and finally, Marcus's younger brother, Devon, 39, in joggers and a vintage bomber jacket, already scrolling his phone. Mercer's jaw went rigid. He looked down at his iPad, the Langford Group. He looked back at the family crossing the tarmac. He looked at the manifest again. He looked back at them, Mara. His voice dropped. She appeared at the cockpit door. "Captain? Are you absolutely sure dispatch didn't mix up the bookings? Look out. There." He gestured toward the window. "That doesn't look like an investment holding company to me." Mara looked past him. "They match the names on the manifest. Mr. Marcus Langford is listed as primary passenger." Mercer exhaled through his nose, a long, controlled sound that wasn't quite a scoff, but was unmistakably in that family. "I want IDs verified before anyone boards, full verification. All 4 of them. Captain, the FBO already cleared them through security." "I'm not the FBO. This is my aircraft." He said it with the particular emphasis of a man reminding the room of something that needs no reminding. Standard protocol. There was no standard protocol requiring a second ID check after the FBO cleared passengers. Mara knew this. Mercer knew she knew this. The silence between them carried the full weight of that shared understanding. She turned without another word and walked to the cabin door. Down on the ramp, Marcus looked up as the stairs descended. He pressed one hand briefly to the back of Simone's shoulder and said something that made her laugh. Then the 4 of them came up, single file, into the cool hum of the aircraft. Mara greeted them at the threshold. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Langford, Mrs. Langford, Ms. Langford, Mr. Devon Langford. I'm Mara, your flight attendant today. Can I start you with still or sparkling water?" "Sparkling, thank you." Celeste smiled and settled into the forward club chair, already opening her portfolio. Devon dropped into the seat across from her and stretched his legs. "Please tell me there's coffee. Single origin Ethiopian, just brewed. You just changed my entire day." He grinned. Simone had stopped just inside the cabin entrance. Her camera bag had swung forward off her shoulder, and she was looking, just looking. At the cockpit, the door opened just slightly. The glow of the instruments, the clean geometry of everything. She was studying fine arts and had a thing for industrial spaces, for the intersection of engineering and intent. She took one small step toward the door. Didn't cross the threshold. Just leaned slightly, one hand resting on the doorframe. What happened next lasted approximately 4 seconds and changed everything that followed. Mercer spun in his seat, saw her, and was on his feet before the thought had fully formed. Step back. He was in the cabin in 2 strides, his voice loud enough to make Mara go completely still in the galley. Right now, back away from the flight deck. Simone startled, her camera bag swinging. "I'm sorry, I don't care what you were just doing. You do not approach this door. You do not look into this cockpit. You do not touch anything in this forward section." He was standing less than 3 feet from her, and he was not lowering his voice. "Now go sit down." Cabin went cold. Marcus stood up slowly from where he'd just begun to take his seat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move quickly. He simply rose to his full height and turned toward the front of the aircraft, and something about the deliberateness of that movement, the absolute absence of panic, made the temperature drop another 10 degrees. "Excuse me." Marcus said it flatly. Mercer turned. He looked at Marcus the way he'd looked at the family through the cockpit window, that sweep of assessment, judgment rendered in under a second. "Your daughter needs to take her seat and stay there." She was standing in the doorway. She didn't touch anything. "I determine what constitutes an infraction on my aircraft, mister." He glanced at his iPad as if he needed to check, though he didn't. Mr. Langford. Then determine it accurately. Marcus's voice was quiet, not soft, quiet in the specific way that carries more weight than volume. She was admiring the cockpit from the doorway. A simple, polite request to take her seat would have been entirely sufficient. Mercer's chest swelled, the kind of involuntary physical response that happens when a man feels his authority questioned in his own space. Let me tell you something. I have 31 years in the air. I have flown heads of state, Olympic athletes, Fortune 50 executives, and royalty. I do not explain myself to passengers. Passengers follow instruction. Is that understood? The 4 members of the Langford family were very still. Devon had put his phone face down on the armrest. Celeste had closed her portfolio. Simone was gripping her camera strap with both hands. Mara stood in the galley doorway, holding glasses of sparkling water, unmoving, as if she had forgotten they were in her hands. Mara, Mercer turned. Before we proceed, I need to complete passenger verification. Bring me their IDs. Mara set the glasses down. Captain, FBO already. I heard myself. IDs. Marcus looked at Mara. Her face was arranged in the specific neutral expression of a person who has learned to survive by revealing nothing. But her eyes, just for a fraction of a second, communicated everything. She was sorry. She was trapped. She was watching a catastrophe she couldn't stop. Marcus reached into the back pocket of his chinos and produced his wallet. He handed over his Texas driver's license without a word. Celeste opened her portfolio, retrieved hers. Devon held his out with the same expression a man wears when he's being carded at 60. Simone, her jaw set, found hers in her camera bag. Mercer took the 4 IDs. He studied them the way a man studies documents he is hoping to find fault with. He held Marcus's up to the cabin light. He compared names to his manifest. He squinted at Devon's with an expression of theatrical suspicion. These were booked through Skyline Executive Charters. That's correct, Marcus said. And you represent the Langford Group?
Yes.
And what does the Langford Group do, exactly? The question hung in the air like smoke. Celeste looked up from her portfolio. Devon slowly picked his phone back up, then set it down again. Simone looked at her father. Marcus studied Mercer for 3 full seconds before answering. The Langford Group is a private equity and real estate holding company based in Houston. We manage a portfolio of approximately $4.7 billion in assets across 17 states. Our relationship to your employer is none of your professional concern. Our names are on your manifest. This flight has been paid in full. I suggest you return to your cockpit and do your job. Mercer's face went through several colors. 4.7 billion was a number that should have given any rational person pause. But Mercer was not operating on rationality. He was operating on the deep bedrock certainty of a man who had never once been wrong about the kind of people who belonged in his aircraft. He looked at the gray chinos and the linen shirt and the joggers, and he decided that the number was a lie. Here's what's going to happen, Mercer said, and his voice had shifted. Lower now, slower, with the deliberate pace of a man who knows he is the most powerful person in the room. He handed the IDs back, not to Marcus, but dropped them on the edge of the nearest seat, forcing Marcus to pick them up. I am exercising my authority as pilot in command under FAR Part 91 to deny boarding to passengers I deem a security or disruption risk. That authority is mine and mine alone. It cannot be appealed on this tarmac. On what grounds? Celeste asked. Her voice was measured, but there was steel in it. Uncooperative behavior. Your daughter approached a restricted area. Your husband is being openly hostile to flight crew. He looked at Marcus. And frankly, I've been in this business long enough to know when a booking doesn't add up. When a booking doesn't add up. Marcus repeated the phrase exactly. No inflection. Just the words. Given back his eyes, neither man blinked. I am asking your family to deplane. If you do not deplane voluntarily within the next 2 minutes, I will contact Denver Airport Police, and you will be escorted out. Your broker will be notified that you were denied service for disruptive conduct. He took a step back. I'd recommend you cooperate. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the distant rumble of a 37 taxiing on the main field. Devin exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked at his brother. Marcus looked back at him, and something passed between them. Not words, just history. The history of two men who had been walking into rooms like this their entire lives and had developed, over decades, a finely tuned understanding of exactly how much rope to give before the moment was right. Marcus turned to his daughter, Simone. "Get your bag." Simone's eyes went hot. "Dad, it's all right," he said it quietly. "I need you to trust me. Get your bag." She picked up the camera bag. Her knuckles were pale around the strap. Celeste stood, folded her portfolio under her arm, and walked toward the exit with the particular grace of a woman who refuses to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her hurry. As she passed Mara, she paused. "You've been kind," Celeste said, "just that." Then she walked down the stairs into the Denver morning. Mara turned away. She pressed both hands flat on the galley counter and stared at the surface and said nothing. Devin was the last one up. He stopped at the top of the air stairs and turned back to look at Mercer, who was standing in the cabin doorway with his arms crossed. "You know," Devin said, in the tone of someone making an extremely mild observation about the weather, "I've been on a lot of jets in my life, and I've never once been treated the way you just treated us. So I want you to think about that while you're standing there feeling good about yourself." He paused. "Enjoy it while it lasts." He walked down the stairs. Mercer watched them go from the doorway, arms still folded. He felt the hot, soaring rush of a man who has successfully enforced his authority against people who had tested it. He felt righteous. He felt protected the asset, protected the standard, protected everything he believed made sovereign air the kind of operation serious clients could trust. He turned back inside and found Mara staring at him. Her face was entirely blank, not the trained neutral of professional composure, the specific blankness of someone who has witnessed something they cannot unhappen. "Get the cabin turned around," Mercer said. "I'll call dispatch. We'll tell them the passengers were deemed a flight risk. They can arrange a replacement booking." He walked back toward the cockpit, his stride long and decisive. "And stop looking at me like that." Mara turned to the galley. She began to carefully, deliberately put away the 4 glasses of sparkling water that had never been touched. She poured the Ethiopian coffee down the drain. She removed the orchids from the forward table and replaced them in their box. She did not cry. She pressed her thumbnail into the edge of the galley counter until the crescent went white. Out on the Denver ramp, the sun was climbing toward 10 o'clock, and the concrete was beginning to hold heat. The Escalade had pulled back around to meet the family. Their luggage was being lowered from the belly compartment by a ground crew member who looked like he wanted very badly to be somewhere else. Marcus stood beside the Escalade, watching the aircraft. His face was calm. It had been calm this entire time, and his family knew that this particular calm was not peace. It was precision. It was the specific stillness of a man who is counting, measuring, timing, and waiting for the exact right moment. Simone sat on the running board of the Escalade, her elbows on her knees. How do we keep running into people like that? She wasn't asking rhetorically. She genuinely wanted to know. Marcus looked at her. You know what he was actually afraid of? Being wrong? Being seen. The moment you looked into that you were looking at, he panicked, because somewhere in that moment he felt something he couldn't name, that you had as much right to look at it as he did. He paused. Men like Mercer need a gateless gate. They need the door to feel locked even when it isn't. Because if the door is open, his whole story falls apart. Devon was leaning against the Escalade with his phone, typing rapidly. I found him, Douglas Mercer. 3 complaints on file with the FAA over the past 6 years. 2 were dismissed. 1 is still open. He showed Marcus the screen. Guess what all 3 have in common? Marcus didn't look at the screen. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a matte black business card that had no name on it, only a number. He looked at the number for a moment, then pressed dial. The line rang once. Marcus. The voice that answered was that of a man who didn't need to identify himself because his voice did it automatically. Raymond Ashby, President and Chief Operating Officer of Sovereign Air Holdings, or, as of 11 days ago, former president. Because 11 days ago, Marcus Langford's firm had completed the acquisition of Sovereign Air Holdings in its entirety, making Marcus Langford the sole beneficial owner of every aircraft, every hangar, every ground lease, and every employment contract in the operation, including the one belonging to Captain Douglas Mercer. Raymond. Marcus kept his eyes on the aircraft. We have a situation. A beat of silence. You're not in the air. No. We were deplaned. The silence that followed had texture to it, weight. Raymond Ashby had been in aviation operations for 22 years. In 22 years, he had heard a great many things. He had never heard those 2 words in that combination from this person. I'm sorry, deplaned. By the pilot in command, Captain Mercer. He exercised his Part 91 authority to deny us boarding on the grounds that we appeared to be a security risk and that our booking, quote, didn't add up. Marcus paused. He demanded our IDs. He yelled at my daughter for standing in the forward doorway. He was verbally aggressive with Celeste and told us to deplane before he called airport police. The silence on Raymond's end lasted 7 full seconds. In those 7 seconds, Mara Hollins, 40 feet away in the Challenger's galley, pressed both hands against the counter and stared at the wall, while Mercer settled into the captain's chair and picked up his headset with the self-satisfied deliberateness of a man returning to his throne. Marcus. Raymond's voice had gone very quiet in the particular way of someone who is working hard to keep their composure. Did he know who you are? Did dispatch brief him? I specifically asked that my ownership status be kept off the crew manifest. I wanted to experience Sovereign Air as a standard client. I wanted to see how the operation treated people when nobody important was watching. Marcus watched a heat shimmer rise off the concrete near the nose gear of the aircraft. Raymond, I think I've seen enough. I am going to call him right now and don't fire him yet. Marcus said it calmly. A pause. I'm sorry? I want you to call dispatch. Tell Mercer that the new owner of Sovereign Air was delayed in traffic on I-70. Tell him the owner is en route and wants a personal tarmac inspection before any further flights. Tell him the owner will be arriving in 15 minutes and that Mercer is to meet him at the base of the air stairs. Raymond understood immediately. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man watching the architecture of justice arrange itself. And then? Then we drive back around the tarmac. Inside the Challenger 850 cockpit, Mercer had just connected to Sovereign Air's Denver dispatch when a second call broke through on the priority line. He frowned at the display, saw the caller ID, and sat upright so quickly he nearly knocked his kneeboard off the yoke column. It was Raymond Ashby. The president of Sovereign Air had called Mercer twice in 4 years, both times about weather-related diversions. This was not a weather day. Mr. Ashby, sir. Mercer straightened his uniform jacket out of pure reflex. I was just about to file my incident report. We had a situation with today's manifest, a group of walk-ons who Douglas. Ashby's voice was stripped of every pleasantry. Be quiet and listen. Mercer's mouth closed. Effective 9 days ago, Sovereign Air Holdings was acquired in its entirety by Langford Group of Houston, Texas. The acquisition was executed under a confidentiality agreement that kept ownership details off internal communications until the ink was dry. As of this morning, the beneficial owner of every aircraft in our fleet, including N884SR, is Marcus Langford. The oxygen in the cockpit seemed to thin. I don't. Mercer's voice came out strange, smaller than he intended. The manifest listed. They came through a broker. They were. There was no indication. The names on your manifest were correct, Douglas. Every name. Every ID you demanded. Those were your owners. Ashby paused. Mr. Langford is a gracious man. He chose to fly without announcement to assess operations. What he found was a pilot in command who told his family they didn't belong on an aircraft they own. The cockpit felt very small. Now, Ashby's voice became deliberate, every word placed like a stone. Mr. Langford has requested that you meet him on the tarmac at the base of the air stairs. He is arriving in 15 minutes for a personal inspection. You will be there. You will be in full uniform. You will conduct yourself as a professional. And Douglas, I want you to understand something. Your career and my position both depend on what happens in the next 20 minutes. Is that clear? Yes, sir. The words came out automatically. Mercer's hands had gone cold. 15 minutes. Do not be late. The call ended. Mercer sat perfectly still in the captain's seat for a moment that was longer than it felt. Then he was on his feet, nearly tripping over the center pedestal, calling into the galley. Mara, she appeared. Her expression told him nothing. The new owner of Sovereign Air is arriving in 15 minutes for a tarmac inspection. I need the cabin pristine. Full reset, best linen. Get the XO reserve out. The good crystal. The Riedel stems, not the service glasses. He was buttoning his jacket, checking his reflection in the darkened secondary display screen. When he arrives, you let me do the talking. Professional, impeccable service. Whatever he needs. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Of course, Captain, she said. Something in her voice made the back of his neck prickle. He couldn't identify what. He walked to the air stairs and descended to the tarmac. The Denver sun at mid-morning had real teeth. The ramp concrete radiated heat that came up through the soles of his shoes. Mercer took his position at the base of the stairs in a parade rest, hands clasped behind his back, 4 gold stripes catching the light, chin level. He had composed his greeting on the way down. Enthusiastic without being sycophantic. Deferential without losing the dignity of his rank. He would explain carefully that he had exercised appropriate diligence to protect the aircraft and that any experienced aviation professional would have done the same. He waited. At 15 minutes, a black Escalade with Texas plates crossed the ramp security perimeter and drove toward the aircraft. Mercer's smile was ready before the vehicle stopped. The door opened, and the smile died. It didn't fade. It didn't shift into something else. It simply ceased to exist, leaving behind the bare, undefended face of a man whose entire understanding of reality has just fractured down the middle. Marcus Langford stepped out of the Escalade in the same gray chinos and white linen shirt, looking exactly as he had 40 minutes ago. Unhurried, calm, and completely at ease. Celeste came next. Then Devon, and then Simone, who looked at Mercer with the specific expression of a 22-year-old who has learned not to say everything she is thinking. They all stopped approximately 12 feet away. Mercer stared. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. You. The word came out at a register above his usual voice. What? How are you? His face went dark red. The residual heat and the humiliation and the dawning horror were combining into something chemical. You have no right to be on this ramp. You were told to leave. I told you. Douglas. The voice came from Mercer's shirt pocket. His phone, which he had forgotten, was still on the active call from Ashby, now on speaker. Everyone on the ramp heard the COO's voice clearly. Don't say another word. Mercer's hand went to his pocket. He took the phone out and looked at it like he'd never seen it before. Marcus took 2 steps forward. He stopped. He looked at Mercer, the way you look at something that has already happened and cannot be changed. "Raymond," Marcus said, addressing the phone. "Are you still on? I'm here, Marcus. I've heard everything." Mercer's hand trembled. The phone trembled. The 4 gold stripes on his shoulders caught the sun. "My name is Marcus Langford," Marcus said, addressing Mercer now, his voice level and clear. "Langford Group acquired Sovereign Air 11 days ago. I am your employer. I am the owner of the aircraft behind you and every other aircraft in this company's fleet. Your paycheck, your benefits, your seniority, they all originate from me." He paused. "I wanted to fly with my family today without fanfare. I wanted to see how Sovereign Air treats the people in its care. I sat in your manifest as a standard client. And what I found was a pilot who looks at a family, decides within seconds that we don't belong, fabricates protocol to demand our documentation, raises his voice at my 22-year-old daughter because she looked through an open door, and evicts us onto the tarmac in the Denver heat." Mercer's mouth moved. "Mr. Langford, I was protecting the asset. I was applying due diligence. I had no way of knowing. You had our names, Douglas. Our names matched your manifest. You had our identification. Every name, every face, every document was correct and verified. What you didn't have, what you couldn't reconcile, was the fact that we didn't match the image in your head of who gets to sit in those seats." Marcus's voice didn't rise. It never rose. It went quieter. "That's not due diligence. That's prejudice dressed in a uniform. And you've had 3 years and 3 complaints to figure out the difference." Devon's phone was visible at his side, screen facing the aircraft. He wasn't recording. He didn't need to. The Pinnacle FBO's external security system had 4 cameras on the ramp. Every frame was time-stamped. Mercer's chest caved slightly. Something in his posture had changed. Not the collapse of a man who has been defeated, but the collapse of a man who finally understands the depth of the hole he has been digging with his own hands. "Please," he said, and the word came out unlike anything he had said in the previous 40 minutes. Raw, exposed. "I have 31 years. I have a spotless safety record. I can fly you to Teterboro right now. I'll give you whatever service you want, please." Marcus looked at him for a long time. "I believe you're afraid," Marcus said quietly. "And I believe you're genuinely sorry right now that you understand what you're losing. But here's the thing, Douglas." He paused. "The fear you felt when you saw my family step off that Escalade, that was yours to examine. Instead, you aimed it at my daughter. You aimed it at my wife. You created a spectacle designed to make us doubt our right to be here. That impulse has no business being at the controls of an aircraft carrying human beings at 40,000 feet." The ramp was very quiet. A ground crew member near the belly hold had stopped moving entirely. A lineman 30 feet away was looking at his shoes. Marcus looked past Mercer to where Mara stood at the top of the air stairs, one hand resting on the doorframe, watching. "Raymond." Marcus raised his voice slightly toward the phone. "Yes, Marcus. Effective immediately, Captain Douglas Mercer is terminated. Revoke his security credentials. Cancel his company authorizations. Notify Pinnacle FBO Security that he is no longer authorized on the Sovereign Air ramp under any banner." He paused. "Contact the FAA and ensure his open complaint file receives today's documented incident as supplemental evidence. Let the regulators decide what they do with 31 years and a pattern." Mercer's knees buckled. He caught himself on the air stairs railing. His hand was wrapped around painted steel, and he was gripping it, the way a man grips something when the ground disappears. "No." The word was barely audible. "No, you can't." "It's already done." 2 Denver Airport Authority vehicles had appeared at the ramp perimeter, called by Raymond Ashby from the Omaha operations, center the moment the Escalade rolled back through the security gate. Two officers crossed the ramp toward thy aircraft with the unhurried authority of people who know they are the last step in a process that has already concluded. Mercer looked at the officers. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the Challenger 850 gleaming on the ramp behind him. The aircraft he had flown for 4 years, had treated as his own kingdom, had believed was a reflection of who he was and what he deserved. He looked at the 4 gold stripes on his shoulders. One of the officers reached him, spoke quietly. Mercer shook his head once, then twice. The officer's posture didn't change. The second officer stepped slightly to the left, a repositioning that communicated, without any ambiguity at all, that this was no longer a conversation. Mercer reached up with both hands. He unfastened the epaulet boards from his shoulders, the 4 stripes that had been his identity, his authority, his proof of worth, and held them in his palms for a moment, looking at them. Then he handed them to the ground crew manager, who had come forward. He was escorted off the ramp without handcuffs, without drama, without the airport police performance he had threatened to stage against the Langford family 45 minutes earlier. He was simply walked away, a man in a white shirt with 4 empty shoulder tabs, shrinking into the heat shimmer of the Denver ramp until he disappeared beyond the terminal wall. Simone watched until the vehicle turned the corner. She looked at her camera bag. She had photographed the industrial architecture of 11 airports across 5 states, and she had never once taken a picture of a moment like this. She didn't take one now either. Some things don't need to be documented. Some things need to simply be witnessed. Marcus put his phone in his pocket. He turned to his family. Let's go inside. The cabin of the Challenger 850 was exactly as they had left it, except that Mara Hollins had done something extraordinary in the 45 minutes they were on the tarmac. She had fully reset the cabin. New linens, new flowers. The Riedel stems out, the Ethiopian coffee freshly brewed. Not because Mercer had ordered it, but because she had decided on her own that if this family came back through that door, the aircraft was going to be ready for them. She had decided this, she realized, within about 3 minutes of the Escalade, driving away the first time, before she had any idea of what was about to happen. When Marcus stepped through the cabin door and saw what she had done, he stopped. He looked at her for a moment. Mara, she straightened. Her eyes were red at the edges. She had been holding herself very still for a long time. Mr. Langford, I'm so sorry for what happened. I should have pushed back harder. I should have called dispatch myself. I should have. You've been doing this job for how long? She blinked. 3 years. With Sovereign, and in 3 years, how many times did you witness situations like what happened today? She looked at the wall, then back at him. Enough. Did you report them? A beat. Once. It went nowhere. Marcus nodded, slowly. That changes today. All of it. He looked at his wife, then back at Mara. When I sit down with Raymond tomorrow for the operational review, there will be a note in your file. You are being appointed lead cabin director for the Denver base, effective the next pay cycle. You will have authority over crew assignments, and you will never again be required to share a crew manifest with a captain you don't trust. He paused. You treated my family with dignity when your captain refused to. That matters more than the title I'm giving you. Mara pressed her lips together, nodded once, hard, the way people nod when they don't trust themselves to speak. Now, Marcus moved toward his seat. How's that coffee? She laughed, a quick, startled sound that surprised both of them. It's the best cup you've had at 38,000 feet. I promise. 22 minutes later, a reserve captain named Walter Odom drove his own car to the Pinnacle FBO from his home in Aurora, 14 miles away, having received a call from operations he would later describe as the most surreal 4-minute conversation of his flying career. He was 51, broadly built, with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, and the kind of unhurried, solid presence that comes from having flown through actual emergencies and knowing the difference between those and everything else. He came up the air stairs, removed his cap, and addressed the family directly. "Mr. Langford, Mrs. Langford, I'm Captain Walter Odom. I understand there's been a difficult morning. I want you to know that getting your family to Teterboro safely and comfortably is the only thing on my mind." He looked at Simone, who was sitting with her camera bag on her lap, and Ms. Langford, "If you want to stand in the cockpit doorway during our cruise phase and ask questions, I will personally pull out the aircraft manual and walk you through it. That invitation stands." Simone looked at her father, then back at the captain. "I'll take you up on that," she said. The Challenger 850 lifted off Denver International at 11:14 in the morning, climbing smooth and fast over the eastern face of the Rockies, the peaks dropping away beneath them like the receding edge of something that had tried to hold them. Captain Odom's hands on the controls were unhurried and certain. The aircraft climbed to flight level 410 without a single degree of unnecessary bank. In the forward club section, Marcus sat with his laptop open but not looked at. Celeste reached across the console between them and put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and held it. Devon was on his phone, having what sounded like a very good conversation with someone named Perry about what the morning had actually produced in terms of evidence. Simone was in the galley entrance asking Mara questions about the aircraft that Mara answered with increasing delight, because she had not been asked about the aircraft in 3 years, and it turned out she knew an enormous amount. Somewhere below them, somewhere on the broad flat grid of Denver, Douglas Mercer was in his car. He would drive home that afternoon to a house that would feel very different from the one he left this morning. His union rep had already called. His lawyer would call by evening. The FAA complaint, now supplemented by runway security footage, time-stamped gate logs, and a COO on active speakerphone, would take on an entirely different weight in the review process. His name would reach every charter operations desk in the country within 48 hours. The private aviation world is not large. It is not forgiving of liability. And a pilot whose photograph now circulated alongside the phrase, "denied boarding to company owner," was, professionally speaking, a man attempting to fly with both engines out. He would spend a long time, in the months after that morning, thinking about the moment Simone Langford leaned toward the cockpit door with her camera bag and the look on her face that was just curiosity, just genuine, uncomplicated human curiosity about a machine she found beautiful. He would spend a long time thinking about how he had looked at that and seen a threat. He would never, in any interview or statement or quiet conversation, fully articulate why. But the question would stay with him, because it was the only honest thing left. The Challenger 850 crossed into Kansas at 470 knots. The sky at 41,000 feet was the specific blue that exists only above weather, above clouds, above everything that makes the world feel complicated. Mara served lunch, smoked salmon on warm brioche, a salad of heirloom greens, a cheese board that Devon photographed before eating. Simone spent 20 minutes in the cockpit doorway with Captain Odom, asking about the fly-by-wire system and the fuel management protocols, and how the aircraft communicated with ATC at cruise altitude. Odom answered every question with the patience of a man who remembered being 22 and standing in a hangar for the first time thinking, "This is the most incredible thing I have ever seen." When she came back to her seat, her face was different. Not the tight, contained expression she'd worn on the tarmac. Something open. "He told me I should look at aviation programs," she said. Marcus looked up from his laptop. "Said the industry has a shortage of people who see aircraft as art. Said most pilots see them as tools." She settled into her seat, reached for her camera bag, then stopped. He said both are right. But the ones who see both, the tools and the art, those are the ones who become really good at the job. Marcus looked at his daughter for a moment. Captain Odom said that? He did. Marcus picked up his coffee, which Mara had brought without being asked, at the exact right temperature. I think I'm going to like this airline, he said. The Challenger 850 touched down Teterboro at 4:17 in the afternoon, on a runway glistening from an earlier shower, the New Jersey marshlands extending flat and silver to the south, the Manhattan skyline visible in the far distance through the cockpit glass. Captain Odom brought it down with the kind of landing that passengers don't notice because there was no moment of impact, just a smooth, continuous transition from air to earth. Devon looked up from his phone, looked out the window and said, "Was that it? Did we land?" Mara smiled from the galley. As the family gathered their things and came toward the door, Marcus paused at the top of the air stairs. The late afternoon light was low and angled, catching the aircraft's fuselage in a way that made the whole thing look like something from a different era, silver and certain and real. He stood there for a moment. Behind him, Celeste came to the door and stood beside him. She didn't say anything. She took his arm. They looked out at the New Jersey afternoon together, and neither of them needed to name what they were feeling, because they had built a life and a family and a company on the foundation of exactly this. Knowing who you are in every room, under every set of eyes, regardless of what those eyes decide to see. Simone came to stand on his other side. She was looking at the aircraft. "I want to come back," she said. "On the next flight. I want to sit up front and really look. Captain Odom will be there," Marcus said. She nodded, slung her camera bag over her shoulder, started down the stairs. Marcus followed his family down into the soft New Jersey light. The aircraft stood on the ramp behind them, tail number N884SR, engine cowlings ticking quietly as the turbines cooled. Mara was visible through the oval window, moving through the cabin with a cloth, resetting for the next flight. Her hands were steady. In the weeks that followed, Raymond Ashby would commission an operational audit of Sovereign Air's crew conduct history. The audit would identify 7 incidents in the prior 3 years that had not been formally escalated, most involving passengers who, for whatever reason, had been deemed by flight crew to require additional scrutiny before boarding. 6 of the 7 involved passengers of color. Not one had resulted in disciplinary action. Every crew member named in the audit would undergo mandatory retraining. 3 would have additional consequences. The complaint reporting system would be redesigned, with Mara Hollins's input, to allow cabin crew to raise concerns directly to operations without routing through the pilot in command. Douglas Mercer's FAA review would take 7 months. At the conclusion, his commercial pilot certificate would be suspended for 18 months, pending a remedial training requirement he would never complete. He would apply to 3 regional carriers and 2 charter operators. None would extend an offer. He would take a job eventually as a ground operations supervisor at a small FBO in Fort Collins. He would wear no epaulets. He would spend his days moving equipment on a ramp rather than commanding aircraft above it. And on certain mornings, when a Challenger 850 or a Gulfstream crossed overhead on its way into Denver, he would stop and look up. It is impossible to know what he thought in those moments. He never said, but in those moments, somewhere above him, there were people living inside his former world, traveling in the aircraft he once believed were his to protect, being treated with the simple, baseline dignity that should have cost him nothing to extend. The sky doesn't hold grudges. It just keeps moving, and so did the Langford family. If this story found you today, if somewhere in it you recognized a room you've been in, a look you've been given, a moment where someone decided your worth before you'd spoken a word, then you already know why it matters. It's not about the aircraft or the title or the money. It's about the refusal to become small when someone is working very hard to make you feel that way. Hit like if this reached you. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that dignity isn't something someone else can take, no matter how many stripes they're wearing. And leave a comment. I want to know. Have you ever had to stand completely still while someone decided you didn't belong? What did you do? I read everyone.